Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Hellbent, chapters 44 through 47, the final chapters of the book. In these chapters, we find out exactly what happened to Trip. We get an amazing resolution to the Aton situation. And overall, I'm feeling pretty good about where we're sitting at this point. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Joanna for commissioning this episode. I cannot tell you guys how much I enjoyed this book and how happy I am with the way it ended. I don't really know what I was expecting. I think that I was waiting for Aton to be a multi-book problem. And for whatever happened with him to be something that led into the next book as well and was not resolved. So things sort of wrapping up with him feels really great. I am sure that it's not entirely over, but like, I don't know. I'm really curious about some things. So, and also I know this is the kind of thing when you finish a book on Audible, it will pull up the like info page for the book. And usually like if it's a book in a series, it'll pull up the page for the next book and ask if you want to listen to it. But because there isn't another book, which makes me want to cry, it was the reviews. And somebody reviewed this book a 1 star and said they almost didn't finish because they found it so slow and boring. And I genuinely don't know what the fuck is wrong with people. And this is the sort of thing that I need to remember. If I ever finish the book that I'm trying to write and I get a bad review, I am going to try and keep in mind that this book got 1 star from someone and remember to keep it in perspective. Because there are times where you acknowledge everybody has their own opinion. Everybody likes different things. We're all, we all are spoken to by different works. And that is a valid and beautiful thing that makes the world more interesting. But then you've got just wrong opinions. And I know that by definition, that is not a thing that exists. But yes, it is. And this is one of them. So I'm going to start at the beginning. There is so much to get through here. When we are in chapter 44, we are still in hell. Anselm has just brought his little buddies out on their leashes and told Alex that somebody made a bargain. And Anselm, he goes on to explain in this chapter. The men of Yale built a gauntlet and called their journey one of exploration. But exploration is just another word for conquest. And like all adventurers, once they had seen the riches they could attain, they had no reason to return empty-handed. They claimed money, fame, talent, and influence for themselves and for their societies. They just left someone else to pick up the bill. That sounds right to me. I mean, for God's sake, it's so predictable in so many ways that I should have seen it coming. And for me, that is the hallmark of a great twist, is that looking back, you're like, oh, of course. It's not just the shock of it. It's like, I can't believe I didn't see it. That kind of feeling. And in some ways, as much as I loved the twist with Bellbaum in the last book, it did feel sometimes like, well, there's no way I could have pieced that together. With this, I feel like I may not have had any of the details, but based on the overall behavior of everybody who has been involved in these societies, I should have seen this coming, right? So Lethe could have investigated the provenance of the table tucked away in the Peabody basement. They could have at least lobbied to shut down manuscript after what happened to Mercy, or gone after Scroll and Key after what happened to Tara. But they didn't. It was too important to keep the alumni appeased, to keep the magic alive no matter who got caught in his workings. That's why they erased the journey to hide the deal they made. The gauntlet wasn't a game, it was an experiment, it was an offering. A very fine one, said Anselm. They walked away with wealth and power, stores of ancient knowledge and good fortune, and they left the gauntlet in place, marked with their blood, a beacon for a wheel walker. I didn't really understand what you were, Galaxy Stern, not until you passed through the circle of protection at Black Elm. We had no idea the wait would be so long. And all of a sudden Alex is like, oh my God, right, because Daisy ate every wheel walker that came here. And she mentions wheel walkers like herself inexplicably drawn to New Haven, drawn to the gauntlet. Which is sort of an interesting thing because the inextricably drawn isn't something that we really saw with Alex. She got put in a position where if she didn't accept this, there was nothing else for her. And it doesn't feel like she was set up exactly. It feels like the invitation, they didn't know what she was when they invited her. Because I really do believe nobody alive anymore was aware of the deal or what was happening here. So I'm interested in what would have occurred if she were left to her own devices and if she would have found herself drawn to New Haven eventually anyway. But I don't know, maybe this counts. It just feels like a very different circumstance. Let's see. It is your presence in hell that will keep the door open, and you will remain here. One killer is owed to us. Hell's price must be paid. And I love Turner being like, look, it has to be Darlington. I was like, God damn, that is cold-blooded. And I'm not mad at him. But, you know, Darlington is partially a demon at this point. And you do feel like if somebody's going to stay, it does make sense that Turner would be insistent it's the one who has not retained his full humanity. And also, he doesn't want to wedge the door open, which is a pretty basic, of course. So then we get this whole thing here where we see what it could be like if she does what that he's asking, and everything that has been taken from everyone around her because of her is the way it keeps being framed. What it would be like if they all got what they wanted. And she was sitting at the head of the table at a dinner party, candlelight gleaming off the dishes, the music of a cello playing softly beneath murmured conversation. The man at the end of the table lifted his glass. His eyes shone. To the professor. It took her a second to understand it was Darlington seated there. To Tenure, said the woman to her right, and everyone laughed. Alex, older now, maybe wiser. She was smiling. Pam turned and saw her face in the mirror. She was herself, but not herself. Confident and relaxed, red hair loose down her back. Everything was easy now. Getting up in the morning, showering, choosing what to wear, what to tackle next. She moved through the world with grace. She had cooked this meal for her guests. She had published. She could teach. Every day would be like this one. A series of tasks accomplished instead of an endless loop of indecision. The possibilities had been ruthlessly pruned, leaving a single, obvious path to follow. She drank deep from her glass. All is well. I have got to tell you guys, that spoke to me so fucking deeply. Like, I didn't know, if you were going to ask me what I expected Alex's perfect, or not Alex, Dawes's perfect life to look like, I don't think I would have realized how badly she struggled with indecision. And I should have, because, you know, everything that she's been going through with Alex, and I don't know if we should do that. This isn't a good idea. But I kind of took that as like, they are in extraordinary circumstances, and Dawes is struggling with doing things that are outside of the black and whites of morality that she's used to. And I should have realized that probably this indecision is part of just who she is. And I am somebody, I struggle with indecision, but in terms of like, in big ways, once I've made a decision, I am very like focused and oriented toward it. And I am a person who has drive. But in everyday situations, like the description of her waking and showering and dressing every day is easy, and that she just accomplishes things. I mean, my God, anybody who suffers from depression, from ADD, or anything like, knows what an utter struggle it can be to just get your day started in a way that you know is healthy and good for you. And I couldn't believe the wistfulness I felt reading that, and what a simple thing it sounds like, and how there are people out there in the world who just don't encounter that kind of obstacle. And I know everybody has their own obstacles to deal with, you know. I'm not trying to say that just because they don't encounter that, their life is easy. But it certainly feels like that's a barrier out of their way, and I am so envious of that. So this really got to me. And then we go to Turner, and his brother is like proud of him. They're standing in a park, and there's a cheering crowd cheering for the jobs he'd brought to the city, for the possibility of a different future. He lifted his arm above his head, pumped his fist. His mother was weeping with joy. His father was alive beside her. His people were around him. He wasn't the hall monitor anymore. He was a hero, a king, a damn senator. He was allowed to love them and be loved by them in return. His wife stood to his left, her smile radiant. She caught his eye, and the look they shared said it all. Better than anyone, she knew how hard he had worked, how much they'd sacrificed to get to this moment. There were no mysteries anymore, no monsters but the ones you have to lunch with in D.C. He would take a little rest, they would go down to Miami, or they'd treat themselves to a trip to the Caribbean. He would make up for every moment he'd been absent or distracted in pursuit of this goal. "We did it," she whispered in his ear. He drew her close. "All is well." And that one got to me because knowing that he's bothered by being a hall monitor, but he is trying to like help his community, that really does have to be a difficult position to be in. To know that you're attempting to make things better, but that people view you with mistrust and resentment, and maybe view you as a traitor, and for good reasons. I mean, that's not an unreasonable position to take. But I really do wonder too about his wife and like who she would have been, and how I'm just really curious about this. And then of course we go to Darlington, and not only is Black Elm full of people and rebuilt and ringing with laughter and conversation, but he actually has like a superpower, and where he can touch things and just know all about them and absorb the contents of a book instantly. It's like everybody else, they have accomplished things that are difficult but possible even in their regular lives, and he has a power, which I don't know if that's linked to the fact that he is partially a demon now or what. He saw Alex in the garden, a black-winged bird. Night gathered around her like a silken shroud shot through with stars. His monstrous queen, his gentle ruler. He knew what she was now, too. He returned to his writings. All is well. And then we go to Alex standing outside of a beautiful little bungalow home that her mother lives in. And Helly is still alive. And she's there with her mother. And she's going to go to a yoga class with Alex's mother and her own mother. And Alex is dead. And there's a photo of her there. She passed a few years back, only 17, a drug overdose. And there is something about like the idea of her mother's perfect life being after Alex is dead, but also seeing that Helly is still alive, and that I'm expecting, I can't believe she's still okay. And that's like, but then Helly, she pulls the wheel from the tarot deck. For the first time, Alex felt something other than love and regret well up in her at the sight of Helly, perfect Helly, with her ocean eyes. "You shouldn't have let them kill Babbitt Rabbit," she said. "I wouldn't have let him die." Alex watched the wheel spin, alight with blue fire that consumed first the card, then Helly's hand, then Helly, her mother, the room, the house, the world swallowed by blue flame. All is well. Alex wiped her tears away, her gut twisting with shame. She'd felt no sorrow at her own death, only relief to see the world wiped clean. She knew her mother had wept over her, but how many more tears had she wasted on a living girl? And Helly? Well, that was the worst of it. If Alex hadn't been with Len that day on the Venice boardwalk, maybe Helly would never have gone home with him. Maybe she wouldn't have stayed as long. She would have made the trip back from hell and returned to the world of softball games and college transcripts and yoga on Saturday morning. She never would have died. And I found this really interesting, that she feels this like anger toward Helly, but it doesn't crystallize completely. There's an anger and a resentment, but it's very quickly drowned in a, yeah, but still she deserves to be okay. And I am hoping that Alex gets to a place, because she keeps blaming herself for Helly's death. Alex, I know you blame yourself. And in some ways, I can see in a broad sense why you feel partially responsible. But Alex, you tried to keep Helly away, and she got you stoned, took you somewhere she knew you'd fall asleep, and bailed. Helly made the choices she made. And yeah, maybe if you weren't at the boardwalk, she wouldn't have come. But you didn't make her come. You existed, and the fact of your existence isn't a sin in and of itself. And that is clearly where Alex is coming from here, is that she does not believe that she should be. Period. She believes that she brings such sorrow and such pain and destruction everywhere she goes, that the very fact of her continuing to insist on her own existence in the world is selfish. And it's the kind of thing that I understand clinging to, because a lot of us, it's the same thing as with Mercy asking, why did he pick me? He could have any girl. Why did he pick me? About Blake. And Alex saying, yeah, I know. She's trying to think of a reason that this is her own fault, so that you can feel like there's a sense of control. But that's what Alex is doing when she's trying to blame Helly. Alex is trying to come up with a way that this horrible thing wouldn't have happened to Helly. And what the only thing that she can come up with is, I existed. And if I didn't, none of this would have happened. Which is absolutely unfair, not to mention potentially untrue. You don't know that if you weren't there, Len wouldn't have been able to convince her to come back. You don't know that. you're guessing. And you're also denying Helly her agency in choosing to make her decisions. Helly came from a family where things were more stable. And so you sort of decided that all of this, like this life that you lived wasn't meant for her and was a stop off. And she was supposed to be able to like go back to it once she was done slumming it with you guys. But the thing is, Helly decided to turn her back on her stable world. She could have gone home. I have no doubt. Anytime. You know, like I am sure that her family would have accepted her and given her another chance. And she wasn't choosing to pursue that angle. If she wanted to get out, she had options. And she didn't take them. She chose to subject herself to what she knew was going to, she didn't know she was going to die, but she knew there was a risk of it. I don't think there was any illusion about that. And she decided that being part of this life was worth risking that for. And she was saying, like, you know, I was homeless once. I can't do that again. Like, if they didn't show up, they would have been turned out on the street. And I frankly just don't see that happening. I don't think that was something that was like a real threat. But I also think you could have gone actually home too, Helly. And you were the one who chose not to return to what you could have had. It's just, Alex is continuing to blame herself for somebody else's choices. And I'm not trying to downplay the factor of the addiction and that causing her to make the choices that she made. But it still stands that in the end, those were her choices. And Alex isn't the one who got her addicted. Alex isn't the one who burned bridges with Helly's parents or anything like that. So I'm hoping that this whole like memory with Babbitt Rabbit and remembering that Helly didn't always make good choices and didn't always have her back is the beginning of Alex is the beginning of her like piecing together that this like golden angel of perfection that she sort of saw in Helly is her kind of projecting what she wished she had onto another girl who maybe wasn't as awesome as she seemed, who was sweet when she wanted to be, who like was willing to hang out with Alex, but not at the point where it would like risk anything for her. And maybe Alex will begin to heal and understand that there was only so much that she could have done. And she did it. She tried to get Helly away. She tried to convince her not to go back because of how dangerous it was. And to explain to her what other girls had done to them. Like everything that she did was all she could have done, short of like, you know, abducting her and tying her up and making it physically impossible for Helly to go back to the apartment. So anyway, this is when Darlington interrupts and says, this isn't real. It's just another kind of torture, living with something that isn't real. And Ansem then says, well, I can make it easier. If you don't stay, your friend dies. And then we see the fountain and Mercy in the courtyard. And Eitan is there. And Ansem is like, you could save her, or she can be yet another girl that you failed. Another Helly, another Trip. And once again, Trip knew what he was doing. Like, he tells her, I was aware that the whole thing with the rules that was bullshit. But Alex is still like taking responsibility for that in a way that is, you know, granted you lied to him and everything, yes, but nevertheless, I feel like the fact that Tripp admitted that he basically knew, I would take that at face value. Tripp isn't really the kind of person to lie to make you feel better, I don't think. I don't know. So Darlington gripped Alex's arm. This was your plan, to give yourself up? This isn't meant to be your sacrifice, Stern. I'm not sure that's true. And she let the fire bloom over her body, and Darlington yanked his hand back, his horns emerging. Alex was only half listening. She was watching the reflection in the mirrored fountain. Svi stood behind Eitan. And that's what I'm curious about, is what about Svi? Mercy had a bottle in hers, Datura. She hurled it at Eitan. The bottle of oil smashed against him, and before he could recover, Mercy shoved him toward the basin. Alex seized the yoke from Anselm and leapt toward the water, jamming her other hand beneath the surface. Anselm was lunging at her, and he wasn't in his human form anymore. "Protect her," Turner shouted. "No one gets through." She had baited Eitan, telling him she was going to work for Linus Reader, that she knew his secrets, that she would share every one in return for the vampire's protection. She'd had Turner call him up with all of the authority of the NHPD to question Eitan's connection to her, to make it clear she was talking, to becoming a liability. Alex knew Eitan would move to deal with her himself. After all, he knew exactly how to locate her. She'd realized that when he'd sidled up to her outside of Blue State Coffee. She'd made sure her phone was on and left it with Mercy in the courtyard so that he could find her tonight. And I love this. This is very, very well done. Had never occurred to me, and I am super into it. She could feel his soul fighting her, slippery and screaming, scared for the first time in a long time. She pulled the spirit to her just as she drew Gray's, just as she had drawn Darlington's. He fought, but Alex had hold of him. Eitan's spirit rushed into her. She saw a city of skyscrapers and sun-bleached stone, tasted bitter coffee on her tongue, heard the roar of the 405 in the valley below. She spat him out. "You want a murderer?" Alex said as Eitan emerged, gasping, his clothes wet, his body ablaze with her blue flame. "Here." "It's not for you to decide who breaches the doors of hell," Anselm sneered. "You cannot—" "I'm the wheel walker. You have no idea what I can do." And she takes the yoke and puts it over his head, and the demons latch onto him. This whole thing is so quick that as I was listening to it, I was like, wait, is what I think is happening? So she keeps her hand in the water, and one after another, they leap into the fountain, passing through to the mortal realm. "What is it?" cried Eitan. "You try to fuck with—" "This whole thing, you get to take your own beatings now," Alex said. "Hell's price must be paid." She leapt into the water, but Anselm seized her arm. And he bites and drinks from her. And she manages to counter him by threatening to pull his soul out of him and take him with her. And I thought that this was pretty effective. But apparently he manages to do something by getting some of her blood. And this sucks. Let's see. She reached out to him with her power, drawing his spirit into her. It was like sludge, a river of misery oozing into her. A profound agony coupled with obscene pleasure, but she didn't stop. Alex saw fear in his eyes, and it was like a drug to her. All is well. And I was really hoping that she'd somehow manage to destroy him this way, but she just spits him out, basically, so that she can get away from him. So, let's see. She gets through, here it is. Svi was gone, probably chased away by the sight of Darlington in full-horned demon glory, and Eitan's body lay face down in the mud. And this is the thing that I'm really curious about, is the fact that Svi saw some things going on. I'm really wondering what is going to happen with his awareness of some spooky shit, especially considering that they were aware that Linus wasn't fully human. And the whole thing, I'm just wondering if we're going to wind up seeing that guy again, maybe working for Linus. Like, you know, I genuinely don't know if he is going to take it for granted that Eitan is dead and go to Linus, or if he's going to try and take over, or if there was something lined up already, like a person that could potentially take over for Eitan after he was dead. I don't remember if Eitan had a brother or not. I know that Ariel was his cousin, right? But I can't remember if there was any other like family who could potentially step into his place. But overall, the fact that there was somebody here that then wasn't, I have to assume something is going to come of that. So they get out of there, and we have one of those like ending bits of a chapter where it's part of a journal entry, and it's about a guy like predicting, you know, destruction from the damned, basically. Then 45, we are in Darlington's head, and he is trying to kind of regroup after everything. It was easy enough to return the spiders to the spindle with another prick of Mercy's finger, but the web above the courtyard still hung thick with melancholy. It took them the better part of an hour to pull it down with a broom they borrowed from the janitor's closet and transfer it into the waters of the basin where they watched it dissolve. They were all weeping uncontrollably by the time they were rid of the damned thing. And that, for some reason, just cracked me up so bad, is the idea of all of them just sobbing while they're like getting a broom and stuff. That just made me laugh. And Eitan's body, they still need to like figure out what to do with it. So Turner helps them dispose of the body. He gets his dodge. And the tempest Dawes had brewed was still hot enough to manage the cameras, but there was nothing magical or arcane about the act of putting a corpse in a trunk. You said you weren't going to help us clean up our messes, Alex noted. This is my mess, too. So then they go back to Ilbastone, and Darlington is thinking about, like, the fact that they hadn't used the dining room here very often. They'd let Lethe atrophy, let its secrecy and ritual make them strangers to each other. Or maybe that was the way Lethe had always been intended to function, toothless and powerless, bumbling along with a sense of their own importance, a sop to the university, while the societies did as they pleased. And I'm like, yeah, that's 100% it. 1000% it. You're starting to make this like organization actually be responsible, and nobody is going to be excited or on board with this at all. And then there's this whole thing with Mercy. This hurts. This really sucks. I hate this. The girl was brave, but tonight had been too much for her. The magic, the spells, the strange objects had all been a kind of play. Now she had helped to kill a man, and the weight of that was no easy thing to carry, no matter the justification. Darlington knew that well. And this goes on a little bit later, and this is the sort of thing that I'm like, I'm just going to read this last bit. Alex had warned them that there would be a moment when she needed their defense, when she would ask them to fight for her without question. They'd done it because they were desperate, and because for all their noble protestations, none of them wanted to suffer for eternity. Mercy had been eager to go along with the plan, to wear her salt armor to face a very human monster. Maybe she regretted it now, but this was not the time to be gentle. "It's not over," he said. "There are more demons left to kill." And when we go back into Alex's POV and we see what's going on with Mercy, she is really, you guys know, like in the last section, when I was talking about her eagerness to become a murderer, I was really feeling nervous about it because she just seemed so blithe and cavalier. And it felt like she had truly not understood the weight of any of it, despite the fact that they're being like actively haunted by these demons. She was not absorbing the gravity of any of it. So a part of me is glad that she is backing off, because I feel like that has to be your first reaction when you see any of this, like the real consequences of this stuff. If you don't just back off, I would question your judgment more, to be honest, you know? But it's frustrating because Alex really internalizes Mercy's reaction and is sort of like thinking that maybe Mercy is not going to want to be friends with her anymore, and mentions how Mercy hasn't said anything to her since that night about Thanksgiving plans, and is really just taking it quite personally. And, you know, I kind of understand that Mercy might want to return to the mundane for a little bit and ground herself again. Now, granted, Mercy had just been saying to Alex, I wanted somebody to see something in me that was more than ordinary. And she got that. And it just isn't what she thought, which is so often how that works. But I really hope that Mercy doesn't turn her back on Alex after all of this, because, again, Alex is blaming herself, but Mercy insisted that she be part of things. Mercy was very assertive. And I don't really think there is a lot that Alex could have done to stop her that would have succeeded. I feel like Mercy would have poked her head in somehow and maybe gotten into more trouble because she wasn't being included adequately. And so she would be left to sort of piece things together on her own, incorrectly or inadequately, and wound up becoming a sort of casualty of everything. So personally, I think Alex respecting that Mercy wanted to be involved was the right thing to do. And it didn't go the way Mercy predicted. And Alex did try to warn her over and over again. And Alex calls herself a user. And again, I just don't see that. I mean, it's just not fair. There comes a point where acting like you are the reason everything happens to people is just self-absorbed and arrogant. And it is becoming a martyr, and it's being disrespectful to your friends and acting like their decisions don't matter and that everything is about you, you know? And then there's a conversation between Turner and Darlington where Darlington is asking Turner what caused him to help Alex by, calling up Eitan and pretending that they were on to him and everything. And he says that, he looked at Eitan's record and all of that was feeling like really, there was a sense of maybe that was what changed his mind because this guy obviously has a record. But it didn't actually turn out to be the thing that changed his mind. He says, I picked her up in Darien the night Harrell sent her to take on Linus Reader. I've seen her trade punches with a guy twice her size. I've seen her nearly get her skull split by a frat boy looking for revenge. But I've never seen her scared like that. And I thought that was sort of like a surprising answer. Just the fact that she was scared, that was what made such an impression on him. But I'm willing to accept that. It's just sort of like more of a personal answer than I would have expected. You know, I was thinking that it was going to be like about, because he says that Alex told him it's a war for she said that Aton is like a soldier for evil and tried to convince him that way. And she's just using his own words, you know, trying to speak to him at a level that he will take seriously and believe. But it does sort of tie in with, like, if she was scared enough, maybe he really was. So, okay, let's see. He wakes up and he sees Alex, like, chilling in the library reading. And Dawes has made soup. And he restores himself. He has that, like, chill in him from the hangover. And then I'm not going to get into this too much because honestly, I wanted to care, but I just couldn't. And I respect that we're in his head, and so we need to deal with this adequately. But they have to figure out, like, how to say goodbye to his parents. And it's just such an awkward, strange situation. And eventually he, let's see. He grasped at the words, and if they take away your sleep, sometimes they give it back again. It was the best he could do. He watched the bodies burn. Part of him wanted to tell Alex not to stop there, to let the whole house burn down to nothing, to let them burn with it too. Instead, they stood together in the dark shadows of Black Elm until there was nothing left but ashes and the old stones that might stand forever, but would never mourn. So, then they go out and the Mercedes is parked there. And immediately, Alex is like, what the fuck? How is it that he was able to bring the car here? It's daytime. And he has a familiar, Darlington said, maybe more than one. They open the car and they gather around the trunk, and Michelle Almadine is there, and she is dead. I'm sorry. She'd said the same thing to Mercy when she had left her at the gates to J.E. earlier that morning. Michelle was his familiar. I think he recruited her while she was an undergraduate. I put it together when I was reading her Lethe Days diary. There were probably others before her. I don't know what he shared with her. Reader knew about the societies. He'd stolen the life of a bonesman. He knew about Lethe. But he couldn't enter warded spaces, so he had to find someone to keep an eye on the gauntlet. She wouldn't do that. She wouldn't work for a demon. But she might, for the right price. He promised her immortality. She wanted to believe she could live forever. That's what he told her. Sometimes the story is what matters. And Alex is looking at her and is like thinking about the fact that Michelle always wore like a scarf around her neck or a turtleneck. And I really, really love that in retrospect, it being described, but not picking up on it. Of course I didn't, because like the times that we saw her, we didn't know that a vampire was real. Unless maybe one time when we saw her later, that meeting had already happened. But yeah, he made a mistake. If he'd been smart, he would have kept her alive to spy for him. He was too eager to hurt us and make us feel his power. I'm going to punish him, Alex promised, as they laid Michelle between the elm trees, as Darlington spoke the words of an old poem over her body, as she called the fire once more. I'm going to hurt him the way he hurt you. This is the forest primeval, Darlington recited. The murmuring pines and the hemlocks, bearded with moss and in garments green, indistinct in the twilight, stand like druids of eld with the voices sad and prophetic. And that is just a real turn that I didn't see coming. I didn't really care too much about Michelle, but, you know, all things considered, he will have a lot of information from having teamed up with her, and I'm kind of concerned about that. So then we go to chapter 47. And this is when they go finally to check on Trip. This is... I am really excited about this. So they go to Trip's, and this whole thing... Do you think he's alive? No, she admitted. They had laid down fresh barriers of blooded salt and knot patterns at the entry to the building, the elevator, and now the door to the stairs. If Trip's demon was still here, they'd have to find a way to contain and destroy it. If it had fled, they'd have to find a way to hunt it. More work, more trouble, more enemies to fight. Why did that excite her? So, the door is unlocked, and they push it open, and there is something on a chair, and it comes and knocks the salt sword out of her hands really fast, and she knows that speed. And then Darlington goes after it, and all of a sudden he says, Darlington? That you, man? Oh, God, guys, don't look at me. I'm so gross. Is that Trip, or is that his demon? Turner kept his weapon raised. He's definitely not human. Shit, I knew something was wrong. I haven't taken a shit in I don't even know how long, and every time I try to eat, I have some kind of seizure. And he looked up guiltily. I think he wants to drink our blood, said Dawes. No! Oh, okay, yes. I'm so hungry. And when they suggest a rat, he says he's not going to eat rats, but then he reveals that he's been eating bugs. And I'm kind of like, I don't know, sir. That's not better. You know that, right? That thing sucked Trip dry. That's all that's left. I couldn't help it. You're a killer, Turner said. We're all killers. I'm not arguing semantics with a vampire, Darlington snarled. You know what we have to do. And then Alex is looking around and she's like, this whole thing, something about this doesn't seem like what I would expect. And she asks him to call forth his seabird. And he can. It's there. And it goes after Darlington. And she has to defend Darlington with her own. And she's like, it couldn't protect his life. So it protected his soul. And basically what she's saying is, a demon did turn him into a vampire, but his soul is still there. It isn't consumed and gone. So it's still him in like the essential way. I love this moment so much. We put him in harm's way. He's our responsibility. Without him, we never would have gotten you back. Didn't you say he did it for cash? Well, said Trip, I didn't want to mention it, but my rent is not the time, Trip. I fucking fell out. I just truly, him just being like, well, it'd be cool if you guys could help me with rent. Sir, what? And like, you were getting rent from your dad, so what happened to that? But yeah, Dawes is saying he is still him. And he might be useful if we're going to go after Linus Reader. We could find a way to place him under some kind of prohibition if we're worried he's going to act out. And I just really am delighted with the fact that Dumbo Trip is now a vampire, but like kind of one. And the idea that he would still be himself because of the salt creature, the salt guardian, that feels completely acceptable to me. This was something that I always had difficulty with when you like look at something like Buffy. She would talk during early seasons to people about how even though vampires might look like somebody you cared about, it isn't that person anymore. It's wearing their skin and walking around in it and looks like them, but it isn't them. Their soul is gone and they're a demon now. So it always bothered me when people would turn and then still kind of be themselves and still be capable of like love and being good, when by the show's own definition, it seemed like this shouldn't be how it is, unless we're going to assume that Buffy didn't know what she was talking about and was wrong, which is never explicitly said. And it just felt sort of like it was too boring to go with the original explanation. And so they decided to sort of play fast and loose with it. And I need there to be an explicit explanation. I need for the person who made a declaration of what vampires are to take a step back and be like, maybe I was wrong. And so here, with it being this way with Trip, but there being like a real specific thing that happened with him that is very unlikely to have happened to anybody else because of how all the circumstances fell out. Him being still him, his like having his own personality makes a lot of sense. And there is so much potential for humor here. Like, Trip is just, he's been funny this whole time to begin with. But now it's like almost too perfect that the kid who Alex frequently described as being really dangerous due to his own privilege without really understanding it is now literally dangerous in a way that he doesn't fully understand and can't entirely control. Like, to a point he can. He doesn't actually lunge at any of them and start to eat them, which, considering how hungry he is, that's pretty impressive, But it's just kind of a one-to-one here. I do enjoy this. And then we get such oh my God, this is so good. Come on, we'll get you to Ilbestone and we'll see what I can find to feed you. But you're going to have to change, Alex said. Of course. I know I haven't been the most responsible member of the team, but I believe in transformative growth. Clothes, Trip. You're going to have to change your clothes. Shit, man. Absolutely. What did I say? You're all right, Alex. He put up his hand for a fist bump. I just really want to eat you. Alex nudged her knuckles against his. I know, buddy. I swear to God. This is so, like, what a delight. And I do like Alex thinking about how they needed this win after everything that has gone so wrong and how bleak it all feels. And the churches on the green shone like stars and the Harkness bells began to ring. The tune was sweet and familiar, though her brain couldn't quite place it. Come on along, come on along. And all of a sudden they see this shape with wings. And its eyes are red. And they're all like, what the fuck? And even Trip says, oh God. Which, like, considering that Trip is now a vampire, if he's having this kind of reaction, I feel like that's a pretty good indicator he does not consider them on the same team. And this is when they realize that Golgoroth took some of Alex's blood in order to prop the door open. And that it may not be wide open, but they're able to get some things through. Alex, what are you going to do? The only thing I'm good at. She drew her salt sword and called to her hellfire, letting it bloom over her body. If Reader wanted a target, she'd give him one. Darlington had already fallen into step beside her, matching her stride, his horns glowing, a low growl rumbling in his chest. A little magic, a talent for taking a beating, a demon at her side. That was all she had. But maybe it was all she needed. Come on, Darlington, she said. Let's give them hell. And I am very excited about this next book. I don't know when it's coming out. I haven't looked into it. But yo, I am all about it. And I am very appreciative. that we get this extra little bit about hell and the doors still being jammed open, because honestly, if it were just about, oh, we need to avenge Michelle Alameddin's murder, I could really give a shit. Like, you know, I just don't care enough about Michelle. Linus feels like the kind of like creature that if you just minded your own business and didn't fuck with him, he might go back to minding his own business. But considering like what he did to Michelle and the way he was trying to make a point, I guess maybe that does suggest that he would still be willing to like poke and prod. I don't know. But just, you know, all this to say, Michelle's murder would not have been enough of a motivating factor to get me particularly interested in the next book. Adding the fact that hell is still jammed open, and the fact that we now have Trip as a demon, and we have Mercy sort of like pulling back, and me really, really wanting to get her involved and happy again, and prove that she will be friends with Alex through thick and thin. I'm still very invested. So yeah, what a great ending. I can't wait for the next one. I'm going to think on whether or not I have enough to say to do a whole wrap-up episode, since Joanna did commission one extra episode beyond what was necessary, or I may turn that extra episode into coverage for Jane the Virgin or something. I will let you guys know, but thank you so much, Joanna, for commissioning these books. I am having a delightful time. We could also transition into me covering the Shadow and Bone series from Netflix, because I didn't watch it yet. So if that is something you would want to do, but I don't know if you were interested in commissioning that series after all this. So I will get in touch. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for listening. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.